All right, what's up, guys? Welcome back to EMPM. That stands for Engineering Major, Philosophy Minor. And you guys know what's going on. This is the channel where you can get a working aerospace engineer's opinions on topics pertaining to engineering, philosophy, politics, and various other social and cultural issues. And it's been a while since I've done a more engineering specific, kind of sciencey related video. But thankfully for you guys, I stumbled across an article this morning in Popular Science, which is a perfect example of how ideas in leftism and, radical progressivism and kind of the extreme end of the Democrat Party, and even moderate Democrats at this point, just how they're like encroaching on every single institution. Well, in fact, they've taken over basically every institution, but science is basically next. And if you guys hadn't guessed that from all the stuff relating to the pandemic, let me tell you that the writing was kind of on the wall early on, even before the pandemic. So this will now be the third video on this channel. So I've done two other videos. One of them was with regards to an article in Aviation Week. And this was an article about some NASA symposium. And basically the headlining event and also the article was all completely dedicated to how NASA is super diverse and inclusive. And it's like the first black person or whatever to be speaking at this event, and it's like this major step in racial progress. But what was more important than that is the article seemed to make the assertion that, the process of putting people into space throughout its inception is somehow also has like racism baked into it. I mean, it was this like really bizarre argument that's sort of frustrating because you can go back in the military side of space technology and weapons technology and how that evolved into kind of founding NASA. And then even within NASA's missions, there were plenty of mixing of races within this process. It was, do you have the core competencies? Does your experience and your expertise and your education align with the qualifications for the job? And if yes, then of course, welcome aboard, right? The idea wasn't that the institution was built on systemic racism, and systemic racism is like in every aspect of aerospace engineering until now. That was never really a part of the discussion. So I'm getting sidetracked. The second video I made was about some leftist, engineering professor who I actually think was part of my alma mater, UC San Diego, University of California, San Diego. And this may have actually been in, I think it was Popular Mechanics, not Popular Science. But anyway, he was explaining what the, foundational structural elements are of statues. And he was explaining what the best way is to either eliminate or damage those central, structural components in order to more easily take down statues. And my perspective is like, why are we using science to destroy? We surely should be using science to create, right? Like it should be this positive endeavor. It's not a consensus-based thing. In fact, the whole scientific process is to challenge your hypothesis with experimentation and then open the board up for others to repeat that same exact experiment and see if they get the same results, or tweak the experiment and see if they get slightly different results, and actually to disprove what you're trying to say. Okay? And then if enough people aren't able to disprove, your experimentation, your hypothesis, if enough people repeat the same experiment and get the same results, that's when we graduate scientific hypotheses to, laws and principles and stuff like that. Anyway, again, I'm getting sidetracked. Main point being, do you really want your next generation of structural engineers like basically wanting to tear down statues of the founding fathers and knowing exactly how to do that from Popular Mechanics articles? I mean, they would know how to do that if they got a degree in engineering. But the the purpose of the education, the purpose of teaching about the scientific principles isn't to destroy stuff, okay? And of course, the reason why you want to destroy stuff is because this professor is a leftist and, he's obsessed with disseminating progressivism throughout, the entire culture, including what's supposed to be kind of an objective way of measuring true things about the world. Okay, so I spent too much time ranting on that. Let's get into this article right here. Car headlights are getting a much needed upgrade with the Infrastructure Act. So first of all, the first thing that came to mind when I read this headline is automobile companies upgrade their headlights without the Infrastructure Act all the time. Okay? A big part of automobile owner, a lot of automobile owners especially like to work on their cars. They like to upgrade their cars. There's tens of thousands of businesses. In fact, I know my buddy, one of my coworkers, he owns a business where he manufactures upgrades to automobile lights, right? He did not need 1.9 trillion in infrastructure spending, which actually is basically just a burden placed on the taxpayer and an increase in inflation. It's actually a double burden because the taxpayer will have to pay more taxes to cover it, and inflation is already out of control and it's going to get more out of control in order to cover it as well. Okay, so the headlights are upgraded even without the Infrastructure Act. So why is this even the popular science title, right? How come this is supposed to be a scientific and engineering related magazine? How come the title isn't simply, you can see there's an Audi on the screen right here, and later on in the article they'll refer to some of Audi's technology, which is without a doubt really cool. How come the article doesn't read, Audi aims to enhance everyday driver experience in dangerous road conditions with improved headlights? What does the Infrastructure Act have to do with it? Well, I'll tell you what it has to do with it. Nobody really liked this Infrastructure Act, except for, elitist politicians on the Democratic side and a couple of turncoat Republicans. No one liked it. So now the machine has to churn through the scientific organization and say, like, oh, well, actually, nothing good would happen if it wasn't for government spending, right? We'd never get upgraded headlights if it wasn't for government spending, and it's just BS. So let's read a couple of things from this article. Over the years, improvements to headlights in the United States largely revolved around simply making them brighter. Well, that's actually not true. But they, of course, you can't mention a U.S. company doing something good technologically because we hate the U.S., right? Meanwhile, the rest of the world began experimenting with in-car technology to adapt a vehicle's headlights to better light the world around them. Meanwhile, the U.S. was there's a typo right here. The U.S. was there's a period there where there shouldn't be. The U.S. was left in the Stone Age with its headlight tech being limited to rudimentary features like auto high beams. Thanks to the new infrastructure bill, that's about to change. Okay, well, you can say it was left in the Stone Age, but they work? Okay, and by the way, I have an old car that doesn't even have any of the fancy stuff, all right? I'm going through something right now with my car, which I'm going to make another video about, because basically smog checks, I think, shouldn't be a thing either, because the only thing it does is make it extremely expensive for you to maintain your car, and also requires automobile manufacturers to put in entirely new systems into the vehicle that wouldn't otherwise be there without government mandate. But anyway, President Biden's ink was just drawing on the freshly signed infrastructure bill as The Drive pointed out a small section in the bill simply titled headlamps. Wow, I'm really glad that we're spending our money. It's like if I want upgraded headlights, I'll just go to the automobile store and I'll pay $15 for a different bulb. This particular section calls for, okay, this is an important part. This particular section calls for U.S. Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg to amend the federal motor vehicle safety standards to allow for more modern technology baked into, you guessed it, headlamps. Okay, listen to this. First off, it calls the U.S. Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, to do something, right? I thought Pete Buttigieg was like the most qualified expert ever to lead transportation, and, simply because of the fact that he checks off an intersectional box. But instead, he's just going on paternity leave on taxpayer money, okay, and not doing anything. Why does Pete Buttigieg need a section of an infrastructure bill to tell him to improve headlights? Now, I said improve headlights, but notice what it says right here. To amend the federal motor vehicle safety standards. So based on you thinking about, think about that a little bit. What's the reason why the U.S. automobile manufacturer can't upgrade headlights, according to this article? Well, what they want to do is they want to blame it on the greedy capitalists who never want to do anything for the little guy and just want to get away with the cheapest possible thing. And so they're leaving us in the Stone Age. Well, first off, international automobile manufacturers have to build cars that tailor to our federal vehicle safety standards. That's number one. Secondly, it's the federal motor vehicle safety standard that's standing in the way of these companies issuing upgrades. Now, would they issue these upgrades if it weren't for the safety standard? Well, I think it's arguable either way, because the whole point of the free market is that you as the consumer vote with your dollar on what are features that you want. So an automobile manufacturer might put out a line of cars that has upgraded headlights. Now, maybe the sale of that car doesn't do extremely well, and they realize that they can sell a different car without the upgraded headlights, slightly less price. Now, I mean, let's face it, these aren't expensive things anyway. They're just headlights, right? But they can sell a different car, slightly different price. They don't have to upgrade this. And by the way, it's going to be easier for you, the consumer, to replace that bulb or replace that lamp enclosure and the fittings and the other subsystems. It's going to be a lot easier for you to maintain. And so automobile buyers keep that stuff in mind when they think about all this technology. But the whole point that I got off on this tangent is because so first off, it tells Pete Buttigieg to do something which he himself should be imagining, this is what I need to do, right? Because he's supposed to be the most qualified person on transportation. He's supposed to be able to know already what the free market wants in terms of headlights, right? Well, guess what? The only thing that knows what the free market wants is the free market, not Pete Buttigieg. So it's telling him to do something because he's incompetent. And what it's telling him to do is to mend the federal motor vehicle safety standard, the thing that's in the way to begin with. All right? More specifically, it instructs Buttigieg to enable automakers to sell cars in the U.S. with more modern headlights than the rest of the world already uses. Well, look, that's what I just said. It's the federal government creating a problem, which is that their safety standards won't allow for more modern technology that was, designed to facilitate some of the issues. And now this article is coming in and saying the federal government's the only way to fix it. It's up to Pete Buttigieg to fix it. How come it's not up to Vice President Kamala Harris? It doesn't really seem like she's doing much else. Okay, I want to get to this part. One of the top contenders in modern headlight tech is Audi, thanks to its digital matrix headlamps. These high-density projectors use 1.3 million micromirrors to deliver pixel-perfect accuracy of light placement on the road. In fact, the lamps can even be used to project intricate patterns into flat surfaces as a part of Audi's driver greeting feature when they unlock the car. The main functionality of Audi's headlight tech, however, is illuminating the roadway. One way it can do this is by flooding a carpet of light onto asphalt within a roadway's lane markings. This allows a vehicle to fill its lane and only its lane with excess light. So basically, in the beginning of the article, they were saying, well, the only thing that US has done is make things brighter. I mean, this is making it brighter too. It's just focusing the beam in a different way. Which, by the way, you don't need all this fancy schmancy language. This is nothing against Audi, by the way. I actually think Audis are great vehicles. The interior is really nice. They drive really well. They've done a good job on noise and vibration, which is like a big thing in car technology. They want to eliminate the sounds of the road and the sounds of the engine so that you have kind of a quiet, pleasant driving experience. I think the interiors of the car and the consoles of the car are really neat. I think one feature of Audis, and I know this is a complete tangent, but one thing that I really enjoy about Audis is they have a couple different spots where you can control, the audio. Not, obviously something simple like volume, but you can also change tracks, or you can, navigate through the sound menus and stuff like that. They have obviously behind the steering wheel and on front of the steering wheel, they have the main audio console where you can do that. But then the passenger has the opportunity to do that because in the center console, there's also a couple knobs there where you can adjust audio settings, which I think is really kind of cool, because if you're a passenger, you can just be kind of relaxing in your seat and just have your hand on the center console and do what you need to do. Or if you're driving, you don't need to look over and like touch a bunch of stuff. You can just use your other hand to kind of navigate the menus and stuff like that. Anyway, that's another tangent, but I want you guys to think about something like this. What happens if you need to replace something in this system, right? 1.3 million micro mirrors. They have special mirrors that allow the vehicle to fill its lane and only its lane. So what does that mean? If the mirrors move, that means that there's an actuator in there. There's a servo in there, okay? When the driver wants to change lanes, the car can detect when the driver begins to cross into the new lane. Okay, that's an entirely different sensor package. By the way, a lot of that stuff already exists in cars, and that has nothing to do with headlights, but still, look at all the different systems that have been implemented in these cars. Now, you as a consumer, when you see this stuff, you're like, oh, these are some really neat features. But let me tell you this, when my headlight goes out on my crappy little 1995 beater, I go to the auto store, I spend $15, unscrew a thing, take the old bulb out, put the new bulb in, screw it in, good to go, done. What do you think you're going to need to do with all these features? You're going to have to bring that into the dealer, all right? Because they're probably going to they're going to do what Apple does, with their devices. You need special tools to open it. There's very specific processes. It's really easy to damage other components. There's a specific sequence. Now, all of a sudden, you're dropping a bunch of money on all this new tech just so that you have the road illuminated, just so that you don't have to toggle on the high beams and be prudential and judicious with it. Oh, and by the way, you couldn't do this unless Pete Buttigieg amends the law that the government already put in place in the beginning that messed with everything. Great. So I'm going to skip down to the very end of the article right here. Okay, because this is at the very end of the article, right? They put all this really, what I think is stuff that belongs in popular science, all these interesting new technological features of an Audi vehicle. I'm sure Audi probably, paid a little bit of money to do some product placement for this article, which I think is totally fine. I think Audis are great vehicles. But again, here is where we see this, leftist ideology just like creeping in to here. They're basically trying to not only give product placement to Audi, but give product placement to the infrastructure bill. It's like, why? This is a scientific magazine. Like, well, you guys don't even have to be concerned with politics for the article to still be interesting, right? But again, it's just another example of the machine turning the wheels in a certain direction and like shifting people's view. They're trying to shift your view to make it seem like, oh, well, I guess like since we're going to get better headlights in the vehicles we have to pay for anyway and have to pay more for it and have it be harder to repair, well, I guess that justifies me spending a bunch more tax money and potentially losing my job to businesses leaving the country and, having inflation keep going out of control. I guess that's a fair trade. I mean, guys, listen to this. So why has the U.S. lacked on its headlight game if the tech already exists? Yeah, good question. The exact same law that Buttigieg is tasked with updating is to blame. Since 1967, the FMVSS has prohibited cars' simultaneous use of low and high beams, which has played a huge part in keeping adaptive headlight tech from U.S. roads, especially since systems like Audi use complementary beams in its adaptive headlights. Thankfully, the 54-year-old legislation now has a deadline to get with the times. Guys, did you need a $1.9 trillion infrastructure bill so that Pete Buttigieg could amend a law that could have just been amended without any of that? How much do you think Pete Buttigieg is going to get paid an hour to look at this or not look at it? Because probably what he'll do, see, what happens is when your tax money goes into this system, right, and it works its way around, do you know what deadline Pete Buttigieg has to amend this? No. Is there any customer that's imposing a deadline on Pete Buttigieg? No. So let's just say for sake of example that Pete Buttigieg makes $10 an hour. He makes way more than that, but whatever. What if there's some other project that Pete Buttigieg is working on that he's already gone over his hour limit? Okay? That means that your money that they took from you it's getting low in the bank. He's getting a little bit thin in the wallet, okay? He has a brilliant idea. Well, I'm going to be transitioning over, updating this new 1967 legislation in a couple of days. Maybe that amounts to 3 days, maybe even up to a week. I'm going to pretend that, his hours are fungible with these charge numbers. I'm going to say that I'm working on the new law for 40 hours because I don't have 40 hours left on the other, budget line, but I'm going to just work on the other budget line because I know that it's going to take me seconds, if not minutes, to amend this law, right? Because what does it really take to amend this law? I'll tell you what, strike it out. Because all the cars on the road right now they don't have the feature to have the high beams on and the low beams on at the same time. You know this in your own car. If you want to flip on the high beams, you got to pull the indicator light back, or you push it forward to keep it on permanently, and you can regulate it yourself if you want to, right? So all you simply have to do to make this come into place is go to the law in the book and say, strike. And you'd think it would be that easy, right? But no. Pete Buttigieg has got to spend hours on it, and then everybody has to spend hours reviewing it, and then it has to go through probably some special session, and then it's got to get written up in a bill, and then it's got to do all this. I mean, this right here, guys, is the perfect example of how the bureaucracy just completely wastes your money. And by the way, Pete Buttigieg would be the transportation secretary regardless of the infrastructure bill. So why couldn't he just do it outside of the infrastructure bill? Well, I'll tell you why they want to tie it to the infrastructure bill. So it makes it look like they're actually doing something, and it makes it look like the infrastructure bill is actually going to do anything to benefit you as a consumer at all, which it is not. Okay? And it's, I'm going to make another video about smog checks because this is a similar thing. My car runs perfectly fine. I have now spent and some of this is my bad. I will fully admit I was being dumb about some of it. And also I was being BS'd by the shop that I took it into, which will be part of the other video. I have now spent probably $800 on trying to fix a check engine light because you can't pass smog without a check engine light, even though the car runs perfectly fine. And a smog check is like $30 maximum. It's actually $75 in California because they have higher emission standards. But thankfully in Utah, it's way cheaper. Okay. And actually, I wish that, the governor of Utah would, man up and just get rid of it entirely, because there are counties in Utah that don't require one at all. So I think that should be a statewide thing. But anyway, so guys, we're going to wrap it up here. This has, again, been a longer video than I wanted it to, but you guys have to realize that this progressive ideology, crazy stuff about climate change, crazy stuff about the pandemic, crazy stuff about how the economy works, crazy stuff about aerospace, it's taking over science. And you guys are getting propaganda. Switch this. You guys are getting propaganda now, not only from the actual political news outlets, but now you're getting propaganda in scientific articles. Why? Why? Science doesn't make moral decisions. Okay? Science isn't what, at the end of the day, science isn't what amends this law, right? You could say we've got, the worst light tech ever, and, lights don't even have to turn on and blah, blah, blah. It's still going to be up to a person to write the law. And it's still going to be up to Pete Buttigieg to decide in his conscience, what that law is going to be. Science does not make that decision, okay? Science can guide that decision, can influence that decision, but it doesn't make moral decisions. So guys, keep that in mind when you start getting this leftist propaganda in your scientific articles, because it's really annoying, Like to go in Aviation Week, which I've been a subscriber of for a really long time, and all of a sudden read about diversity and inclusion at NASA as if the space program itself has somehow been this tool of racial oppression since its inception. The only way we can solve it is by putting people in charge who don't meet core competencies or, go through the due diligence in the meritocracy. It's absolutely ridiculous. Okay, guys. We got 2 more videos to make today, or maybe 1. Couple more videos today. Happy Sunday. Catch you guys in the next one. Later.